Greetings and welcome to the Kuyperian Commentary Podcast. This is episode 119. I am here today with Reverend Harold Guptill, who is one of the pastors of Tri-City Covenant Church in Somersworth, New Hampshire, and also Reverend Paul Edgar, who is one of the elders there. And I wanted to talk to them because I found out about a month ago that they have been blessed with a rich heritage. They have inherited as a church the library of the late Gary North. And so I thought I would invite them on and have them talk about that a little bit, that heritage, what they plan on doing with it, and what it means for them. So first of all, guys, welcome. Glad you're able to join me here.
Thank you for having us, Rick.
Yes, thank you.
Great. I imagine most of our viewers, listeners know who Gary North is. But for those who don't, would one of you like to talk a little bit about who he was, why he was important, what his legacy is as far as politics, economics, Reconstructionist theology, all of those sorts of things?
Yes. Well, I could start it off and say that Gary North was a co-founder of a movement that has been called Christian Reconstruction. He was a co-founder of that movement along with his father-in-law, R.J. Rushdoony. And the first contact we had with any of this goes back to 1984. And some of us were given a book called Backward Christian Soldiers. And this really impacted our church a great deal, just that one book. Our church had been a Baptist church, premillennial, dispensational, antinomian. There's probably a few other heretical adjectives that we could use. Needless to say, we were in a period of great transition. And Gary's book meant a great deal to us. It was a few years later, 1987, that we really wanted to have him come up here. He was living in Texas at the time, and we really wanted to have him come up here and speak to us. And he was, of course, too busy, didn't want to deal with a podunk Baptist church in New England. But we had the idea of, well, let's see if we can entice him with a $2,000 check towards the publication of his next book. And that did get his attention. He did come up here in May 1987. Our transition was well along its way by then to the Reformed faith, to post-millennialism, theonomy, and other things. And needless to say, it began a great relationship with Dr. North.
Great. So, I mean, that was the beginning of a long relationship then. Did he visit your church from time to time and sort of witness you transitioning? I mean, he just passed away last year, if I'm not mistaken, or was it? It was last year.
Early last year.
So was he, he witnessed your transition from Baptist church to sort of Reformed Baptist for a while, right?
Yes.
Did you jump? And then I remember hearing your story. Your church is an old church, so it's been around, well, old relative to most CREC churches. You were around a lot longer than that. So
yes, our church was founded in 1972. And of course, it went along for a period of time with no confession of faith, no creed, the popular expression, no creed but Christ type of thing. During our transition, we did embrace the Philadelphia Confession of Faith, which is parallel to the London Baptist Confession. But Gary was with us throughout other transitions, and he did come back here several times. I would say maybe 4 or 5 times. Once he was here for an entire week, and that was if you know Gary at all, that was an exhausting week, in a good way, but he's a guy that is high energy, and it was just a wonderful time with him. But yes, it was after, I think, the second visit that our church made a very major transition to paedo-baptism. And at that point, the Philadelphia Confession was replaced by the Westminster Confession. And we were still independent. We hadn't joined the CREC yet. That came later. But Gary was with us throughout all of these transitions, and he maintained close contact with our former pastor, Tom Clark. And then also it continued up into his graduation to the church triumphant.
My first exposure to Gary was in 1988. So I came a year after the first time he was here. And my first exposure to him was when I came in with our founding pastor to the church. My wife and I were looking for things, and he asked us to visit him, and he brought me over here. It was interesting enough, it was on a church work day. But then as he walked down the hallway, he picked up a book called Unconditional Surrender. And he handed that book to me and said, "I need you to read this." And that was, of course, a book by Gary North. And it's beautiful how he always presents everything, the centrality of Jesus Christ in all things. So, yeah.
Right. And he was so incredibly prolific. I mean, if you go to his website, even now, one of the things I like is you can buy any of his books you want, but also he made almost all of his books available for free on his website as PDFs, which I have a lot of respect for that, because it means, this is what I believe, and I really want other people to read it, believe it. And most of those books are, 500 or 600 pages long. He just wrote and wrote and wrote endlessly. So, so you sort of had that relationship with him for years, and talk a little bit about how you ended up with his library after he passed away.
Well, the relationship was always a close one. And Gary was a forward-thinking guy. He could see ahead, and he saw past his death, and he wanted his legacy preserved. And he honored us greatly by saying, "I want you guys to preserve my library and my legacy," which was a great honor, but also a great feeling of responsibility. We're still developing the plan for that, but we have the library here. We've renamed our annual Bible conference that we hold each February to the Dr. Gary North Annual Bible Conference. And we plan to do some podcasts from this library here, featuring some of his works.
So as far as his library is there, and we've got some video of that. These are excerpts from a video Dr. North recorded in January 2022.
Hello, I'm Gary North, and this is the 15th of January 2022. I'm going to take you through a brief tour of my working library. This library has been built up over many years. In some cases, I suppose I began buying some of these books 60 years ago. They have helped develop my thinking. I hope some of you will find some of the material interesting. The book will be available in a working library for researchers who want to get some idea of what I read and what I underlined and what was interesting to me. And I hope will give some indication of the kinds of topics that fascinated me. This is my main working library. It has been for almost a decade. I had the bulk of my books stored at the American Vision organization, but I gave those years ago to the Mises Institute. So this is what I have used as my main library, certainly since about the year, what would be, I guess it would be 2013. So I have pretty much lived, typed, thought, read in this room for a long time. I've structured the library so that I could find certain things when I needed them. And usually my memory has been pretty faithful to me. At the very top, we find the books Bronze Age America, America BC, Saga America by Barry Fell. These are books primarily on North America, but very early, way prior to Columbus. Here I have American history. You can see Democracy in America by Alexis de Tocqueville. We have materials on cults of the ancient Greek states. We have Clarence Carson's multi-volume history of the United States, very conservative worldview. So basically American history materials. Down here we get into social theory. These are books mainly in this section by Robert Nisbet, who has been very influential in my life, was really my mentor in sociology as a graduate student. Down here we have materials on all aspects really of American life, American culture, and they've helped me for a long time trying to keep up with what is constantly changing in American history, which means you just can't keep up. Now, over here, we have ancient history, very ancient history. These are materials, Greek cults, Greek religion, Greek culture. You have to start with the Greeks to understand the humanist aspect of Western civilization, but ultimately you have to start with the Hebrews, not with the Greeks. Here you have the transition from Greek culture to the Romans, Roman civilization, Roman society, and then that leads to medieval history, the development of medieval culture in the West. Now we come closer to the modern world. You have the rise of the Renaissance, which is a battle between Greece and Rome, revival on one hand and Christianity on the other. And then here we begin to see the rise of the development of the later Enlightenment, which became much more self-conscious in its denial of God, in its denial of the relevance of the Scriptures. Here I get into socialism, the whole background of socialism, the socialist networks, the post-French Revolutionary period. And this, of course, leads to the Russian Revolution finally in 1917, where the real battle becomes visible between the remnants of Christendom in Russia and between, at that point, the extension of the French Revolution. The Russian Revolution really is an extension of the French Revolution. To understand socialism, you have to understand the critique written by Ludwig von Mises, initially in an article in 1920, but in his great book on socialism, which is here. Mises was crucial to my thinking, so I have a large section on Mises. Goes all the way over through that section of the library. Then here, the great historian and scholar, economist Thomas Sowell. These are the Sowell materials that I've used. And then these are just general books on, some on Christian economics, but conservative economics generally, though not necessarily of a particular school of thought. And in here, these two shelves are being photographed, made into PDFs. These are the books I have written or published over the years. And we're going through them one by one. We hope to have them available for anybody, anywhere in the world, free of charge on a permanent basis. These are crucial books on why Keynes was wrong, why the Keynesian system is wrong, and why the free market system is the appropriate approach to developing economic thought. Here, materials on envy, the development of anti-socialist economics to challenge the post-World War II era of economic theory, on topic after topic, on war, on economic planning, central planning. Again, useful books. You can find how my thinking developed. Now, in this section, these are books on church history. Very important in the development of my thinking. Several shelves on church history. Here we get into the writings of R.J. Rushdoony, who was my mentor very early. These are books by Van Til, again, basic to my thinking in terms of understanding how we think, how men think, how we draw conclusions. These are books by Bahnsen, Craig Bahnsen, who was a faithful disciple of Van Til. Here, ancient history extending over, and then books that I published, in some cases, in this shelf. Books by Abraham Kuyper and on Abraham Kuyper, Dutch theology, Dutch Calvinist theology. And then here we begin American history, especially theological history, that shaped the United States, shaped the development of the country. These are a lot of primary sources on American history, standard primary sources, and then secondary materials written by people who made, I think, contributions to the understanding of how the United States the basics developed. Of my working library. And I hope in the future young men and young women will put this library to effective use and find that it extends their own understanding of history of Christianity, history of civilization, and the history of wars in the 20th century.
Is it something that's going to be, this is kind of a museum in your church? Is it going to be available for congregants to check out, to read? What's the plan there?
It is going to be available for people to check out books. We're cataloging everything. We have some library management software that we've incorporated, and that's a work in progress now. But yes, people will be able to borrow books, hard copy. Many of them are not authored by Gary. He has a great deal of political science stuff and economics stuff. He had an organization once that was called the Institute for Christian Economics, in keeping with the idea of the Lordship of Christ being over every area of life. One primary area was economics. So some of his best work is in that. He had an economic commentary on the Bible that he emailed me in his last year of life, and he said, "I just finished it today. The last keystroke, the last enter, he just finished indexing the whole thing."
Wow.
He said, God impressed upon him to do that back in the 1960s is when he began. He was a long-term thinker. He planned his time and the use of his time very, very diligently. He wasn't a random guy living by accident. I guess I'll go here. I guess I'll go there.
Right.
He was focused.
Yeah. And just the fact that he completed that shortly before he died too. He didn't know when he was going to die, I'm sure, but he God let him finish his big work there before he passed. As far as how people know Gary North, I know him, and I think probably a lot of Reformed folks know him through the Reconstructionist route. You hear about Rushdoony, and then you hear about Gary North, and then you hear about Bonson, and you kind of come down that trail. I think many people were exposed to him first, though, just generally in the public as an economist, because he would write economics articles, sort of a big free market kind of guy, had an interesting take on libertarianism that was, I think when Doug Wilson calls himself a theonomic libertarian or something like that, I'm pretty sure he's getting that from Gary North. I think that's a North kind of idea. So yeah, a lot of different ideas there. I'm sure there's a sense of responsibility among the elders at your church of, we've got this legacy to maintain. It also seems like a great blessing. So you're going to be doing conferences, you're going to be doing podcasts, you've got these resources at your fingertips. Do you have any other sort of long-term plans for, would you be able to publish? Do you have any manuscripts that he's written or anything like that haven't previously been published or anything along those lines?
I'm not aware of that in detail, but Sharon, Mrs. North, is handling that down on her end, and she and her son-in-law, Joel McDermott, are handling a lot of this. So I would say that's not our strong area. We don't have any publications in the hopper or anything like that, but I think that Sharon does. And I know that the project of digitizing everything is nearing completion of all of his work.
Oh, wow.
He was involved in a great deal of things. He served on the board of the Foundation for Economic Education for quite some time, that libertarian economic group out of New York. And again, the economic commentary was a major pillar of his work. He was a real believer in the Kuyperian sphere sovereignty idea. He one time conducted a conference down in the Basilean group in Delaware on the three spheres of Christian Reconstruction: family, church, and state. And I remember this would be where he would have deviated from Rushdoony a little bit, because he spoke strongly on the centrality of the church,
right,
in Reconstruction. That would not have been a strength of Rushdoony. But Gary maintained a friendship with Jim Jordan right up to his final year. and they got together socially and so forth. They were close friends. And so Gary had an appreciation for the doctrine of the church, that a lot of Reconstructionists, they're, strong patriarchal and libertarian and that, and these things all have their strengths, but Gary's, it was unmistakable. He saw the church as central.
Right. And even in his book, Political Polytheism, there's a great line where he said the slogan for his revolution is politics fourth. He said, first there's individual salvation, the proclamation of the gospel. Second is renewal of the church. So he put that right up at the top. People need to be Christians, and then the church needs to be faithful. And then that should trickle down to the families being faithful, right? The family develops from that. The church nurtures families. And then eventually it moves into politics. A lot of the theonomic discussion, when we think of theonomy, it's about, okay, what laws should we have? Yeah. How do we apply God's law to society? And those are really fun discussions, but generally they're also wildly hypothetical, because currently we're in no position to apply God's law to our culture in that way, because our culture mostly hates God's law. And so I think his focus on families or individuals, churches, families, that's going to get you the political change you want. And then all those discussions get to come into play.
And he also followed the federal vision discussions over the years, and in keeping with his still of support for sacramental theology, sacramental efficacy, he was right there with our guys, Peter and Jim and Jeff. He was right there on that. And we really appreciated that here, because the theonomic position alone can be very stark and hollow apart from the empowerment of the Holy Spirit. And Gary had that balance, I think.
Right. And that's, I guess, also where that strand of Reconstructionism theonomy from Tyler, Texas plays in, right? Yes. With, you got James Jordan and those guys. So yeah, I did not realize what a close connection Gary North had to James Jordan. That's new for me. I knew they knew each other. I knew they were friends, but I didn't know how close they were. So that's exciting to learn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One other aspect I wanted to mention is that one of the visions Gary had also for his library was allow it to be a study center. So we'd be moving in as time goes along. We would like it if some people would use his library, even from the CREC or anybody who's doing some research themselves. They could come here and use it as a study center and look through his material and use it as a library as well for them. So
yeah, well, you have a thriving Christian K through 12 school at your church that's been around for quite a while. Do you ever envision, maybe not as part of that, but as a side thing, having maybe courses or classes that people could come and take at the Gary North Study Center or things like that? Come for a 3-day intensive, and we'll talk about these books or these ideas while you're here, or something along those lines.
I think the 3-day intensive idea sounds very attractive to us, and yes, we would like to develop that a little bit. The next, we often have our conferences in February. People ask, why February in New England? And the answer is because we need it. We're on a boost. But this coming February, we're having Brian Noder come here and present an exposition on the book of Colossians. And we're hoping at these conferences that some CREC guys, some Chalcedon guys come out of the woodwork and attend and have exposure to the library. And then from that, we would like to develop the idea of these 3-day intensives that you mentioned.
Yes.
Yeah, that sounds good. So question for you both here as we're kind of coming a little closer to the end of our time, but I'd like to ask you both, if someone has never read Gary North, never been exposed to him, and they say, Paul or Harold, give me the one book I should start with. What's the first Gary North book I should read? What would each of you tell them?
Can I answer that?
Yes.
Without a doubt, if the person had any theological grounding, I would suggest Dominion and Common Grace. It was a small book. I think it began life as an appendix to one of his larger ones, but that, to me, it hit the stratosphere as far as the whole picture. Dominion and Common Grace. If the person were just starting off with some basics, I would follow Harold's idea that Unconditional Surrender would be a good primer.
Right. And then I would also recommend that if people are, inquisitive about how does this Christian faith thing work out in my daily life, I would recommend that whole Biblical Blueprint series. Of course, Gary edited a lot of it, but he also wrote many of the books in that. And that gives you some very foundational principles and how to work the Christian faith into your life, into your family, and into your personally as well.
Do you know, are those still all in print? Because I have several, but I've picked them all up at used bookstores, so I don't know.
They're hard to find, but they're all on his free website.
Oh, okay. There
Everything's been digitalized onto that. So
yeah. They look really nice on a shelf though, because they have all the matching covers.
Yes.
So PDFs can't do that. You can read them on PDF, but they don't look as nice on your shelf. So yeah, good stuff. Just as I've only been pastoring for I guess 3 years now. I'm coming up on 3 years, but before that, for a long time, I was a teacher. I still teach a class for Veritas Press online, but one of the books that I read early on that I thought was really helpful to me was he edited a collection of essays called Foundations of Christian Scholarship.
Yes.
I don't know if but it was just essays about how are we as Christians going to take education for Christ, and it was a really good set of ideas. Coming in the 80s, you'd had that long period where Christians had withdrawn from scholarship and the arts, and you had a few shining lights there, but not many. And then you had Francis Schaeffer, and you had, this explosion of interest. And I kind of feel like Gary North was coming at a very advantageous time there, right before Christian classical education exploded, and sort of laying those presuppositional foundations for here's what you have to have in place if you want your education to be Christ honoring and Christian. So that was a book that I really enjoyed by him. So collection of essays he edited, not all by him, but he put it together. So good stuff. Well, thank you both for sitting here and talking to me about this. If I will put links to all the books you recommended in the notes under the show, so that if anybody wants to start their Gary North journey, they can do that. And I'll look forward to seeing what you guys come up with in the next couple years.
So I hope some of it will catch your interest, and at some point you will pursue one or more of these topics, and that you will be able to, in this sense, extend my legacy, and someone then will, at some point, extend your legacy by doing something comparable to what you see here.